Okay.
And hello, everybody. We are live, I think, across all of the different social networks.
Across a million channels. Let's see if I can get it loaded up on Twitch. Oh, we're so close. Still showing as offline on Twitch.
I've got us live on Twitch, so I can see us. We're good.
All
We're
right.
good there, and I can see us. I can see us live on LinkedIn as well. We're looking good.
Yes,
I just need to
live
remember
now.
to. Yeah,
That's what I need. I need that to feel real. Okay, folks, it is not Thursday because on Thursday, some of us spent the day in quiet contemplation, attempting to ensure that we were written into the book of life for the new year. It was Yom Kippur yesterday, so we didn't do Nerdlog yesterday. It's Friday, and so we're having a very special Friday edition of the Nerdlog. We got a great group here. We're going to do some really fun stuff. We're going to talk about the Observability Forecast. So that is trying to get a view of what's going to happen in observability in the coming months and years. And we got a really good group. To start with, we've got three-time co-host Aaron. Aaron, say hi to the people.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be back again. So we got our first comments in chat from Tina, who's on the southeast coast of Florida. Tina, I'm also in South Florida, so I hope you're doing better with the heat than I am right now because I've got my AC turned pretty low, so hopefully you can't hear it, and I'm melting. But other than that, I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be back on Nerdlog again. And yeah, great way to start my weekend.
Fantastic. Now, we got two guests because two is the amount we need to really cover the future. Let's start with below me because I'm looking at Twitch, so I actually know how we're all visually arranged. Below me is Buddy Brewer. Buddy, say hi to the people. Tell them what you do for New Relic.
Yeah, hey everybody. It's my first time on here, so really excited about that. I am responsible for our product partnerships at New Relic.
Love it. And we've got Greg. Greg is over here visually to my right. I'm pointing to my, doesn't matter. Arrangement doesn't matter. Greg, say hi to the people. Tell them what you do for New Relic.
And you guys see you to my right as well.
There we go.
So I have responsibility for a bunch of different things, but in the context here, doing research and bringing insights to developers and engineers around what's going on in observability. So really excited to talk about that, the research that we've done and what the implications are.
And I do think, hey, Falcon 0412, Falcon's a really committed guest, so I'm just going to give him a little shout out. Thank you so much. Let's see, do you think that we can introduce the screen share host, Aaron? And by the way, in my view, Aaron has somebody else's name on their little like preview on the view, and it's getting me every time. So I apologize if I mess up. I want to call Aaron Grace today. I just want that out there. But yeah, let's see if we can start showing the screen share because what we're looking
up. Hopefully not. I think maybe.
Well, let's give it a sec.
Oh no.
Let's give it a sec.
Oh, here it goes. There we go.
Live. I'm feeling it. Yes. 2021 Observability Forecast. My hair looks great, but I don't mind it being reduced to a tiny postage stamp at the as the side of the video because we're going to talk about the 2021 Observability Forecast. And so, where do we want to start? There's this exec summary, but I like to start at this point here, which I'm pretty. Yes, there we go. Which is this idea that observability is mission critical. And Greg, why don't we start with that? What do you think has changed? What do you think has made observability come to the forefront in recent memory?
Yeah, well, I think we saw an acceleration of observability and the observability practice even pre-pandemic. But the reality is that the pandemic has further accelerated that. You look at all of our lives, you can tell from the 4 screens, we're all at home. Most of our viewers are at home, maybe some are in a coffee shop. But the reality is the pandemic has changed life for most people and therefore most companies. So we think about, shopping, we think about connecting with friends, family, and coworkers, even with our doctors for that matter, entertainment, all of it is fueled by digital experiences. And so I think, excuse me, to make sure that those digital experiences are the best possible that they can be for the end user, the reality is that observability has become more critical than ever.
Yeah, something I really think about is that one of the like pressures around being at the office was this idea of like, we want kind of management to know what's going on. You know, we want to get that sense, right? And sure, in a tech company, right, you weren't really going to get a great sense from just, you know, staring at people at their computers, but there was still some sense, right, that you had some kind of finger on the pulse. When you saw people running around, you knew something was wrong, right? But now, obviously, you need to have observability doing that. Buddy, let's see if you can feel this one, or let's talk about this. There's also some new technology out there. We're talking about containerized workloads and cloud-based workloads, and it feels like that contributes to the reason that observability is sort of increasing in importance.
It totally does. It totally does. And this is the thing, like with the, you know, we've all been, I think, at least speaking for myself, it's hard sometimes to remember what the world was like before March 2020, right? And we, you know, everything that the pandemic has reshaped so much that's happened, and it's ratcheted up the expectations that users have that software has to work in order to do substantially everything that we do anymore. And so that makes software hard. But the thing that, you know, is also true, and Greg, you know, touched on this a minute ago, is that software was already pretty darn hard before we had a global pandemic. And you had this massive shift to the cloud and the re-architecture of software from, you know, monoliths being decomposed into a lot of microservices, and the containerization and all of these things that had added so much complexity. And that was a massive, massive challenge for software developers to wrap their heads around before everyone had to go home and spend substantially all of their waking hours, you know, interfacing with technology for every aspect of their lives. And so when those two things collide, you know, it's not surprising that of the 1,300 engineers that we, you know, surveyed for this, that 94% felt like having some assistance to understand what's happening inside of that software is important to their jobs. And not only that, but that 90% of them felt like it was also strategic for the entire business.
Yeah.
You know, we said this again before the pandemic, that increasingly software was becoming everyone's business. It was reshaping every industry. But then, you know, you add the urgency that the pandemic brought, and it took what trends that people thought were going to take 3 to 5 years to play out and compressed that down to a much shorter period. And one of the things that people are scrambling for, I think, is to like just help to wrap their minds around what's happening inside all the software so they can solve problems and make improvements faster.
Yeah, and it's a little bit. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Greg. I
was just going to say, Nick, and that's even playing out when you look at like budgets for observability.
Yeah.
The survey also showed that 81% of executives expect their budgets to increase within the next year, and some 20% of them said it would be significant increases. So it's not just we're seeing it in practice, but we're seeing it in terms of like putting money where our mouths are and actually investing in observability because it's so critical to the business and to the roles.
Yeah, I remember a time when you go to meetups or something, you know, observability of any kind, really beyond just like, hey, your logs are rotating and stored somewhere, was like, oh yeah, I should do that at some point, right? And
just to chime in, one other thing there is like this idea of it expanding across the entire software lifecycle. So it's in planning, it's in building, it's in deployment, and it's in running in the operations, right? And in the survey, 91% of our respondents said they see it as critical, not just traditionally in sort of the operations, right, and troubleshooting, but across the entire software ecosystem, they're seeing value for observability.
Yeah, and I really like that as an idea that, you know, you're not seeing it just in one part, right? And and my analogy was, you know, when you would go to a meetup and you say, oh, I've been meaning observability, is that I am just old enough to remember when there were some security concerns, e.g. like to SQL injection vulnerability, where you would go to a meetup and be like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to do something about SQL injection vulnerability sometime, you know? Now, of course, no one would ever say that to you, right? They would rather, you know, be cast away on a desert island than be like, oh yeah, I mean to implement some security feature, some kind of rotation, or, you know. So in the same way that something can go from being kind of like a side interest, an interesting concept, to super duper important, I think that's what we're seeing with observability, right? And here's this little chart about how much it's like every part of the software lifecycle, because we just saw this like supply chain attack stuff where, not thinking at all about your dev side is like, that's probably not going to work, right? You probably need to actually also watch staging and also watch these other pieces. All right, let's get to, all right, what's the next point in here? There's a massive opportunity to expand and mature the observability practice. Buddy, help me understand, what do we mean by like a mature observability practice?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are kind of behind that. I think the first one, the one that probably people like us spend the most time talking about, is this idea of the way that software fails has changed, right? And software used to fail in predictable ways. And so the idea, this is the distinction between monitoring and observability that many of us draw, is that monitoring was about dealing with, known unknowns. I'm pretty confident that when the software fails next time, it's going to happen in one of the following ways that it tends to fail. And so we can put threshold alerting around it. We can create dashboards. We can have folks looking at that at critical times, et cetera, and then feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to handle tomorrow's issues. And what we find from talking with our customers, as well as what I think is reflected in this survey, is, and lots of people are talking about this, including us, is this idea that, the way software fails is not predictable anymore. And the way that it breaks tomorrow is likely to not be the way that it broke yesterday. And so you can't do things like rolling up data, summarizing things into dashboards that are static. You have to be able to dynamically interact with the data quickly. So the tools that you're using have to be able to churn through large amounts of data using queries that they're not necessarily caching and running over and over again, and operating on data that's a lot wider with much higher cardinality. And the reason, I think, goes back largely to the re-architecture that's happened in the systems with the decomposition of monoliths into all of these microservices that are now talking to each other. I think that's one of the things that's driving it. But there's another one that I don't know that as an industry gets talked about quite as much. And we talked about changes in challenges that our customers, who are software engineers, are having to deal with, that we're noticing. We talked about two of them. We talked about the change in application architecture, and we talked about the pandemic. But the other thing that's happening is that we're finding that the engineers that we're talking to, a lot of them, their roles are changing. And so, I grew up in engineering. I'm a software engineer by trade. And for most of my engineering career, I was a front-end developer. And so I hung out with other front-end developers, went to front-end conferences, and used front-end tools, both to develop and to monitor. And then I had, peers that I worked with and the companies that I worked at who were server developers. Same thing. They had their APM tools that they used to understand that. Infrastructure engineers, same thing. But what we're finding is that there's a convergence in these roles where increasingly the engineers are not just front-end engineers or back-end engineers or, their service or infrastructure or database or any of that. They're focused on delivering a part of their product's user experience to users all the way through the stack. And so increasingly we're finding that more and more of these people are full stack engineers. And what happens is when you become a full stack engineer, your life gets really hard because you have this massive swivel chair problem. And we saw this in the reflected in the data where 72%,
34% doing multiple monitoring tools, right? Like that's a lot. Yeah,
totally.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were going to say your own stat. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's in some cases 13% said that they have to use I think 10 different tools. And where that happens is because suddenly you're responsible for the front end, the service layer, the infrastructure, the network. You bring all of that stuff together and you union all of these different tools together, and suddenly you're tab switching and pivoting between all these different tools. And so being able to rationalize all of that together, whether it's selecting tools that maybe can do more things, or also another big piece of it that's driven by the shift toward open source in the observability space is interoperability, so that the data and the tools interact better. But it's created a big problem. That third dynamic, I think, is a significant one with the changing role of the engineer today.
Yeah, so Falcon makes another comment here about having the ability to see application status right from the developer environment over to pre-production and even production is really big. And I think there's one thing I really want to emphasize. When we see, sorry, a pen leaked, so we're getting that in high res, so good for that. There's one thing we really see, which is that you see these, oh, I'm using more than 10 tools to monitor. And it just feels like, oh, what a basket case organization that must be, right? They're just, we gotta kind of medicate our ADD a little better there, right? Because it's like, why do we get so many tools? But the reality is, right, if you use AWS or you use another public cloud, you have some bare metal and you do, front end, of course you do front end work as well, right? By default, when you say, hey, I want to view this AWS, queuing service performance, and I want to view my bare metal, I want to view my front end stuff performance. I say I have Google, analytics on my front end. I want to view all that together. Most tools are going to tell you no, right? Like they're going to be like, no, I don't have any way to get that CloudWatch data from AWS into this, along with your top output from your server, right? It's not something where, oh, you just bought 10 things when you should have bought one, right? It's like, by default, there just is this fragmentation, And so there is work to be done just to even get your back end and front end, even just, Rails to React, right? Even if you have this very simple setup or straightforward setup, right? You have work to do even to get those two on one dashboard before you even introduce a cloud provider.
Yeah. And that's one of the areas where, the bad news is that monitoring and observability have been late to the open source and open standards party. The good news is that it's there now. But if you look at the evolution of open source and open standards, I mean, it's kind of worked its way through, right? It began with the operating system kernel with Linux, and then moved to, the servers with Apache and Nginx and all these different things. And now, we're in an era where, at New Relic, we're a commercial vendor, but we're one who embraces open standards like OpenTelemetry because it provides you the ability that didn't used to exist to let the data interoperate. So you can actually bring things together. It used to be a non-starter. It's not easy in 2021, but it's possible. And that's one of the things that we're spending a lot of our time doing today is embracing those open standards for that reason.
Yeah, Greg, talk a little bit about that. Like, what do we, most of my conversations have been, hey, we're excited about this. It's cool that you're doing this. But I do occasionally have these conversations where someone says, well, why is, New Relic so interested in, open observability standards, right? It's like when we say, hey, go use Grafana, it's not like, aren't we eating our own lunch there? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think it fundamentally comes back to, we believe in a data-driven approach, right? And we want every engineer across every stage of the software lifecycle to have as much of their data as possible to be able to solve the challenges that face them. And with open telemetry, with open source, in an open ecosystem, you're getting insights and best practices across all of the other developers and software engineers who are facing some of the same challenges you are in their business. So collectively, we're growing as a community and we're getting better at it as a community. And the reality is, the best approach to do that is an open approach where you can tap into the insights, the best practices of others in the community. You do have all of your data in one single platform with that visibility, so that you can actually plan, build, deploy, run, et cetera, really great software. And I think that taking a stance on open and being open is a really critical part of advancing the industry forward.
Yeah, and I noticed that one of the things that really stands out here, and I'm skipping forward a little bit in the report, is talking about observability on Kubernetes and how we're seeing this change towards these containerized workloads, which starts from like an open source standpoint, right? That we saw some, closed or much more sort of traditional SaaS modeled containerization tools, where now we're seeing, no, we're actually going to use, like, for container orchestration, we're going to use an open source tool. And, I guess that's the thing, is like the selection of open source isn't just the way of the world, isn't by default, right? But it is something that you can see grow. My favorite one about this for New Relic is when talking with Avi Friedman from Kentic, where, we said, oh, we have an integration with Kentic. And I was like, oh, cool. So like our engineers worked for 3 weeks and we have API keys and it was going to break sometimes. Like, oh no, we just started, sending data to your stack, and it shows up in the dashboard. It's like it was a weekend project by one person. I was like, what?
Yeah, he did it on our free tier, actually. He signed up for a free tier account and started doing it.
That's fantastic. I absolutely love it. And so that's us seeing the benefit, right? And I find, okay, I'm talking too much, but I'll tell this last anecdote. Personally, when I try to explain, like, why are we talking about these, like the Open Telemetry project, very often my kind of sneaky thing is, when I'm trying to put together a conference talk, I talk entirely about an open source tool and about doing this in an open source way. Now, when you get to the point for observability where you're saying, okay, now you need to stand up a database, and there's great open source tools to do that. You need to make it queryable, and you need to make sure that your dashboard doesn't generate queries that absolutely choke the database for everybody trying to use it. I can explain that. I can explain what you need to do and what you need to do to maintain it. And then it's very easy for me to say, obviously, this might be a part where maybe a SaaS tool would be great, right? I will show you how to do it yourself, but it is not like you just hit a button, right? To do that kind of massive, once you say, okay, all the data needs to actually be available, it's pretty easy to sell New Relic or some other tool. I'm not saying it has to be New Relic, but it's very easy to see as part of the solution. Yes, open source is a huge part of it. But that doesn't mean you don't ever want, someone else to solve a problem for you. So let's talk a little bit more about this Kubernetes. Sometimes I don't feel sure that we're going to see Kubernetes everywhere. Buddy, do you agree? Do you think it's going to be, 40% of all workloads are going to be containerized in Kubernetes in 3 years? You think that's the likely outcome?
It's heading that way. I mean, 10% are in production today, right?
Yeah.
That's just one of the things that we found, and the other 90% are evaluating it. It was 88%, right? So it's just one of those things where you saw this happen from, I think, multiple directions where Kubernetes emerged as the leader. But the one of the things that tells you that there's absolutely a there, and it's the future for running software at scale, is the fact that it's not Kubernetes. It's not like there was just this issue and then Kubernetes came along to work on it. Kubernetes was the one that emerged as the leader. The problem was so severe, people approached this from multiple angles. Mm-hmm. And there's now been a convergence on Kubernetes as sort of the de facto standard for operating containerized software at scale. And we're seeing one of the nice things about New Relic with the survey, but also we look at our install base. We have a very diverse install base, from very large enterprises to very early stage startups, and all over the world. And yeah, both anecdotally when we talk to our customers, as well as reflected in the survey. It's just the direction that everybody's moving in.
I will say, if you're interested in sort of even just getting a start on these containerized workloads, there's this very smart woman who wrote this primer on containers in Increment Magazine this summer. You should check out. In that article, I get to talk a little bit about how I am actually not 100% certain that Kubernetes has come to be the dominant thing out of a field of like, hey, container orchestration. How do we have a semi-automated system to run and orchestrate our containers? But whether or not Kubernetes is always going to be absolutely on top, containerization absolutely will be, right? Like you simply saying, hey, do you think we should package up our software with the requirements that it has and distribute it that way? Duh, right? Like that's not like a head scratcher if we're going to do that. So I absolutely think that like, is time spent on Kubernetes and Kubernetes observability well spent? Absolutely, because some tool like Kubernetes is going to be the way that we do that, right? And I think the other part where this makes observability super important is that Kubernetes gives you a ton of control about what happens in a semi-automated way in response to the behavior of your containers, right? So if you don't have a good view of what's going on your containers, you're sunk, right? You're really, 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 really lost. Okay. That's me plugging my own stuff, of course. But Greg, what else do we want to cover for this report? What else are the big takeaways that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier, but I don't know that we shared the data, is this idea of the, every stage of the life cycle, and the fact that 91%
on that page while you talk. But yeah, go ahead.
91% of the respondents see it as critical across every stage of the life cycle. And then diving deeper into, okay, why is that? 42% said that observability helps support digital transformation, and 23% said it helps deliver better digital experiences for end users, which goes back to that whole topic of conversation we were having about, how the world is moving to digital, how this is helping, how observability is helping deliver better digital experiences for users. And then, of course, there's other benefits beyond that. 27% said faster development as a result of observability, and 25% even highlighted cost effectiveness of leveraging observability tools to be more effective and more efficient in their development work.
I love that. Now, by the way, just as a side note, Falcon 412 mentions that their prediction is that the ELK stack is going to grow a bunch in the future, and maybe Elasticsearch, Kibana, maybe Logstash. It's an interesting idea, and it's interesting to see Logstash like put at the top and actually listed within that stack for observability. That's pretty cool. But yeah, no, I think we're definitely seeing that like full stack observability has clear business benefits, which I think much like security in, I don't know, 2005, sort of before my time, is like, oh, well, that's a thing we should do because it makes the engineers happy, right? Observability is becoming this thing where just like security is like, no, there are business impacts here if we don't have it.
I think the way I characterize it is it's gone from a nice to have to a must have.
Yeah. Sorry, was that Aaron? Were you talking about?
I just there was one thing there we completely glossed over, and I think we probably should address it on stream. Is you call it the ELK stack and not elk?
First time I'm seeing the term. I don't know.
I think it's the first time.
That's also what I say when I'm out in the woods. I'm like, look, there's an ELK over there.
That's like I said pseudo for years, and then somebody was like, hey. It's sudo because you're doing it as the super user. I was like,
wow.
This is what somebody told me. I don't know.
As well.
Is it?
I definitely say pseudo.
You say pseudo? I always said pseudo until someone told me it's you're doing it as the super user.
My cloud engineering really starts with serverless, and someone mentioned after seeing one of my talks, they said, "You say AWS Lambda and AWS Lambda both in every talk, and it's driving me insane. Which is it?" I'm like, I don't know. Who cares?
My first ever development job, and I'd only ever. This is like pre-YouTube days. You didn't have video tutorials. Like you picked up a textbook still, and I'd only ever seen the word cache written down. And my first ever job, in like a week on the job, I asked somebody if they'd refreshed their cache. And I didn't live that down. That was like 5 years of that job, and I still was getting grief about that before I left.
I had the same issue when I was early in my career, and I was working with Sun Microsystems and iPlanet, which was a company they had picked up, and we were doing PR for their portal servers. And I was on a call with folks from the client and folks internally, and I had never heard telephony said out loud. I'd only read it, and I never lived this down for the rest of my career inside that agency when I said telephony.
I'm curious with my own kids. My oldest took a while to start reading, and now loves audiobooks, and he can read. He reads pretty good, but he's never going to have that experience of being like, oh boy, I was really misled by these bad instructions. Right. That word is actually misled. We never got the chance to have that stage. Okay, so but buddy, I didn't give you a chance to say this. Is there so Falcon asked, are any new features New Relic is coming up with as a Christmas gift? I would say between now and Christmas there will be many new features. New Relic is a big org. We'll do many exciting things. But buddy, what's a final thought? What's something you want to make sure people take away from this report?
I think it's I just bring it back to what Greg said earlier. There's so much untapped opportunity as an industry, and this is an area where we're pouring intense focus with our own R&D into this space where okay, great, so you have all of this capability now to collect data, telemetry from everywhere, and you can put it in a place where you can query it quickly, right? But what are you going to use all of this data for in service of what? And no one would ever aspire to, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say out loud, what we really need to do? We really need to take a data-driven approach to putting out fires. There's so much more you can do with data. A data-driven approach to MTTR is table stakes, but that's what we're all, everyone, and you see it reflected in this report. A lot of people are at the table stakes. They see that there's an opportunity to use that data for so much more. And so that's an area where we're putting a lot of effort and we're encouraging people to get more value out of the data that you collect and use it to do things like prioritize the work that you need to do across your stack. Use it at times when the software is maybe not on fire, and then and also use it as a way to reduce MTTR and get software healthy when it breaks. But there's so much more utility in the data than that.
Yeah, nobody who says, hey, we put that fire out because we called Greg and Greg happened to know about this problem from 3 years ago is like, oh, good work, cool, we're perfect for next time, right? They're going to say, hey, we need to be able to be doing a better job of this. Yeah, and there's really great recommendations at the end of this report. I think that, frankly, when I read them, having worked in this field for the amount of time I had, I was like, oh, my problem with these is that these are obvious. Then I thought about every conversation I have with like IT professionals, with CTOs and stuff. I'm like, nope, none of this is obvious. This is all stuff that people need to be doing. And, lots of people are doing great, but, like this is all stuff that really can be useful to you in your org. If you put these in as design goals, especially for new architecture, for new tooling, really, really useful.
And I would just add the reality is, and we saw this in the survey data, everybody that's listening, everybody that will read this report is at a different place in this maturity curve, right? Yeah. And so there will be insights for people at every level and in every place in that journey. So, they're the people that are further along and have are leveraging Kubernetes and containers and perhaps a bit more mature in their approach, they'll still find insights in this, as will someone who's just starting their observability journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's, I do often make the comparison to security. In general, right, a little bit of security is probably not going to do too much for you for benefit, like, to be honest, right? Like, securing just a little more, like one little more, it's like, well, you sort of kind of need a full audit, right? A little bit of observability absolutely can go a long way, right? Saying, hey, this one part of the system, hey, our mobile app, which used to just be a complete mystery box, now we get this one little indicator of what's going on with it. We just get the number of current users, right? We just get a few pieces of data from it. That can really improve your situation, right? Talk about, I see all the time, situations where what we see in New Relic is maybe a slightly more limited view than if you went and tunneled into that server and ran all these commands. But it's still useful just because that little bit of data unification is huge, right? So yeah, a little bit of adding a piece of this. Do not feel like it's like, oh, I have to completely transform my architecture to be able to do this, right? You can add a bit of observability today at the New Relic free tier and see some big benefits.
That's totally true.
So I'm gonna drop. I dropped in the Twitch chat, and we'll drop on when if you're watching this canned on YouTube in the next few days, pre-recorded. You'll see that in the show notes. You link to Greg's Twitter, but Buddy's Twitter, both great. Buddy, you can get a lot of NASCAR updates on his Twitter, so that's critical. But is there other stuff that you'd like to plug, other stuff you'd like to see people participate in related to New Relic? Or do you have a SoundCloud album dropping, or what else do you want to promo?
Well, I would say, Nika, the point that you just made about the, if you want to try any of this stuff out, sign up for the free tier. It's email address and a password, and you get a 100 gigabytes a month of data and access to everything that we do today, as well as all of those things that we'll be coming out with between now and Christmas. It's all perpetually free, and you just go to newrelic.com to sign up.
Yeah, and I will say, like, when I was sort of on my own as a lone gun developer working for smaller organizations, I would just spin up a few things with synthetics on the free tier, low frequency, and you could get real good stuff done. You can get real insight real quickly. If you're working in a large org and you want to use the free tier to just monitor a few subsystems or as much as you can with a lower frequency, absolutely fantastic. I would say, like, New Relic is one of the teams where I feel totally comfortable being like, yeah, just go try that free tier. It doesn't lock you into anything. You have really good open standards, and you can get so much benefit just at that level of, like, you can store a ton of data. You can store and query a ton of data at that level.
I mean, it could be as simple as taking some, pointing to our, OTLP endpoint and just put OpenTelemetry data into our data platform at, 100 gigabytes a month, or, point your Prometheus data at it. It doesn't even have to be, the agents that we built. We've really worked hard in particular over the last year and a half to open the platform up to every source of data that people are using.
I love that. And so links in the show notes to take a look at the report. Come back every Thursday. Normally Thursday will not fall on the high holidays, so no worries. Next week we'll be back next week on Thursday with the Nerd Log. Aaron, do you have other stuff that you want to plug? Other stuff that the Relicants are up to?
Sure. Yeah, we actually, because I should talk about it because I was inspired by the last time I was on Nerd Log to really start taking a deep dive into the Relic logs. We talked about it a lot last time I was on. So I am currently doing a series of posts on the New Relic log and also on my stream where I'll be working with logging in Python. And the first one just went out last week, I think, where I tackled getting started with structured logging. So.
Oh yeah, we're talking about that. I think like next week we're going to talk about structured logging in Python.
Great. Yeah.
I think maybe you're a guest. You can be a guest next week. Maybe on the calendar. If you're watching this pre-recorded on YouTube, none of this matters, so don't worry about it. But yeah, we're going to talk about that soon on the Nerd Log because I want to go a little deeper with a few little best practices. This is a real theme for me. Is a few little best practices with your logging and observability and metric sending can have huge benefits for your stack.
Yeah, and it really does help if you're sending all of the context with structured logging. You can answer them questions in the future that you didn't know were going to be questions.
Yeah.
Just sending all the additional data you have means that in the future then you'll have that historical data you can go back, you can query with NRPL, whatever you need to do. You don't need to know all of the questions that you may need to answer in the future right now. And that's like the big thing for me is just having that data there and go, oh, well, I didn't know this was going to be a problem. And now I can go and research and I've got all the data. So,
I love
it.
We should put that at the top of this report, right? Which is like, we talk about, digital transformation and better observability, but I think you'll both agree, I think we'll all agree, that one of the key ways to even think about that is to just say, this is about knowing the answers to questions that you didn't know you were going to have, right? And that can really be transformative. All right, folks, I think that's it for this week. This was a good one.
The thing I would do is ask folks, if you've been watching it like on YouTube, watching it on LinkedIn, this is their first time doing this multi-channel broadcast. I would love to hear what you thought. Like, how was the experience across the different channels? You can reach me on Twitter. I'm just Aaron Bassett there. My DMs are open. Please do give us a shout or in the chat on any of the platforms as well. I'll be keeping an eye on those too. This has been a bit of an experiment today. I think it went okay.
Yeah, we did pretty good. I'd say solid B minus for me and everyone else. I'm not the platform went well, but yeah, if you're enjoying watching on LinkedIn Live, do let us know. Give us a quick comment, and we'll make sure that you feel the love. Thank you for checking us out on YouTube Live as well. We're seeing some viewers there. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for coming out, everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Greg, buddy, thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Take care.
I think Aaron's gonna hit stop broadcast. We'll see one more.